I was reaching for a coffee filter in the break room when I heard them laughing. Evan, the new CEO with his crisp haircut and ego shaped like a yacht, and Josh, his personal mascot disguised as a strategy VP. They were standing just outside the glass, sipping something green and overpriced, like success came in smoothie form. Evan leaned in and said, "She's still here? Jesus, I thought we gave her a retirement cake a year ago." Josh chuckled like he'd just won frat prank of the week. Nah, she's still coding something. Decoration at this point, not brains. I froze mid-reach, not out of shock. Hell, I've been called worse in better lighting, but because that word stuck. Decoration. Like I was a potted plant someone forgot to water but couldn't throw out because it still technically had roots. I took my coffee black that day. No filter. Hey, before we go further, if you're listening and even halfway invested in this mess, it'd mean the world if you subscribed and gave this story a like. It keeps us going because trust me, stories like this, they're not fiction. They're blueprints in plain sight. Back to Evan. I'd been at Brincor Labs longer than he'd had chest hair. 2 decades of staying late, patching code, testing frameworks in silence, while louder men took credit and bonuses. I didn't complain, I built. Encryption modules, predictive sorting logic, the company's entire smart logistics stack. I had 5 patents to my name. Real ones, not fluff, written by interns and rubber-stamped by legal. Each of them tied directly into our core product offerings. Each of them licensed internally, and every single one authored by me. The founder, Grant Bryn, used to call me the Keystone. Said if I ever left, the bridge would collapse. But he stepped down 3 years ago, and Evan stepped in with slick shoes and a pitch deck addiction. Suddenly, the past became a liability. Gray hair meant slow. Tenure meant expensive. I got shifted from chief systems engineer to principal specialist, which is startup speak for too hard to fire without headlines. They wanted to push me out softly, a whisper of an exit. Smiling handshakes, a party with carrot cake and fake hugs. Instead, I dug in deeper, not out of pride, out of principle. Because deep in the company's legal binder, one most of them never bothered reading, was something they forgot, something I hadn't. See, when those 5 patents were filed, I retained partial authorship rights under a licensing agreement. That agreement had a quiet little clause. Section 17C. If internal renewal wasn't submitted by the 10-year mark, the license expired. And if the license expired, ownership reverted to the author. You want to guess what quarter we just passed? I'll give you a hint. Nobody filed the renewal. They thought I'd be grateful just to still be breathing near their shiny IPO dreams. Instead, I was watching the clock, waiting for the moment the reversion clause would flip like a silent trapdoor. No fireworks, no memo, just a form, a digital timestamp, a legal switch, and the moment Josh called me decoration, I knew I was done waiting. Let them decorate their empire without a foundation. Let's see how that holds up. Josh was holding court again, reclined in one of those executive lounge chairs they reserve for egos bigger than their resumes. I'd only stepped in to refill my thermos, but there he was on speaker, trying to impress some recruiter from San Francisco like the stock price depended on it. Yeah, he chuckled, swirling his algae drink like it was scotch. We've got this one legacy dev, been here forever, wrote like half the core stack, but she's more decoration than brains at this point. Just part of the furniture, you know? He was 5 feet from me, staring right at the espresso machine like I was invisible, or worse, irrelevant. I didn't blink. Didn't raise my voice or throw anything, though I considered lodging a travel mug where the sun doesn't shine. Instead, I turned around and walked out, quietly, which was always more dangerous. I didn't go back to my office. I went home, poured a glass of Syrah, pulled out the manila folder I hadn't touched in years, the one with my original licensing agreement tucked neatly inside behind a printout of our first patent filing. There it was, like an old friend waiting patiently. Section 17C, Patent Reversion Clause. It had been my one non-negotiable back then. I remember the meetings vividly. Grant had no problem with it. "It's your work," he said. "If we ever screw up the paperwork, it's only fair it goes back to you." We both signed it. Legal sealed it. And then everyone forgot. Everyone but me. The clause was simple, brutally elegant. If the internal licensing agreement wasn't renewed 10 years after initial filing, ownership of the patent reverted to the author of record. No board vote, no appeal, just a default process, like letting a mortgage lapse. And the kicker? The 10th year ticked over last quarter. I hadn't said anything because, frankly, I didn't think I'd need to. I assumed someone in legal would catch it and do their job. But Evan and his frat squad had gutted half the legal team during restructuring. Too expensive, he said. Not agile enough. So nobody filed the renewal. Nobody noticed the timer was running out. They were too busy naming product updates after Greek gods and pretending PowerPoint animations were innovation. And now the patents were in limbo. Not theirs, not licensed, just waiting. It's a strange kind of anger, the quiet kind. Not rage, not bitterness, more like clarity wrapped in ice. Because once you see it, once you know what they've forgotten, it stops being a betrayal and starts being leverage. That night, I didn't sleep. I annotated the agreement, cross-referenced every version, checked the USPTO site, confirmed the lapse, set reminders. Lined up calls, lined up options. They wanted me invisible. That's fine. Ghosts can walk through walls. And I was about to start haunting their entire empire. Evan called it a check-in. Said he just wanted to align on vision. The invite came through his assistant, one of those 20-somethings who thinks Helvetica Bold counts as leadership. The meeting room was already set. Iced water, legal pad, a small stack of papers laid out just so. He didn't look up when I walked in, just gestured for me to sit like he was doing me a favor. "Thanks for coming," he started, all teeth and pre-rehearsed empathy. "We've been thinking about how to best support your next chapter." Translation: "Please leave quietly so we can put your name in a newsletter and pretend we loved you." He talked about legacy, about transitions, about graceful exits, like I was an aging ballerina instead of the reason their logistics platform still functioned without catching fire. "We're putting together a very generous retirement package," he said, as if dangling a carrot would distract me from the blade behind his back. "And naturally, we'd love for you to sign over full patent rights, just a formality. That way, everything stays clean heading into the IPO." He slid the documents toward me like a magician revealing the final card. 3 signatures already filled in. HR. Legal. Josh, of course. I picked them up, skimmed the top page, neatly typed, carefully worded, buried in euphemisms. They weren't just asking me to sign off, they were asking me to disappear, to hand them the last real leverage I had and vanish before the new investor deck hit the printers. I placed the papers back on the table, just so, folded my hands, met his gaze. "I'll need to speak with my attorney," I said, keeping my voice as even as the AC hum behind us. He laughed. Not a real one of those brittle chuckles that comes from people who've never been told no. "Oh, come on, you're not gonna lawyer up. You're not that guy." I smiled. Not the polite kind, not the please like me kind, the kind that says, "You've just miscalculated and it's going to cost you more than your Porsche payments." Then I stood, walked out without a word, left the folder on the table like a fuse waiting for a match. What they didn't realize was that silence doesn't mean surrender. It means I've stopped explaining myself. It means I've already started counting down. They assumed I'd go gently. They had no idea who they were trying to retire. 3 days of silence. No follow-ups, no emails, not even a passive-aggressive Slack from Josh. I knew what that meant. They thought I'd simmer down, maybe get nostalgic, and come crawling back with a pen and apology. Instead, they got a certified notification from the U.S. Patent Office at 10:42 a.m. on a Thursday. Subject line, transfer request confirmation. I didn't need a front row seat to know how it played out. Legal got the email first, probably read it twice before realizing what it meant. The reversion clause in action. Automatic, non-negotiable. 5 core patents, previously licensed internally, now transferring back to the author of record. That record? Me. By noon, Josh was pacing. By 3 p.m., Evan had called a confidential strategic review session, which is executive code for "oh shut." I wasn't invited, obviously, but word travels fast when half the people in the room owe you a mentorship favor. One of them texted me a photo of Evan's whiteboard. 3 words underlined in red: ownership, expiration, leverage. Apparently, General Counsel spelled it out for the board in language even Evan couldn't wiggle around. She owns them. Cleanly, the original license expired last quarter. The clause is real. It's enforceable. And unless she agrees to sell them back, or we sue and win, we don't own our product pipeline. Silence. Followed by what I'm told was the sound of Evan dropping his Mont Blanc pen. They hadn't just forgotten to renew a form. They'd forgotten who wrote their engine, Who coded the framework that powered every algorithm they were now trying to white label and stuff into investor brochures? They thought it was theirs because they'd monetized it, but IP law doesn't care about your pitch deck. It cares about paper trails, and mine was pristine. The panic started with Josh. He sent a flurry of internal memos flagged urgent, asking legal if there was any way to backdate the renewal filing. One of the paralegals replied bluntly, "Backdating is illegal. Please do not email that again." Then came Evan, who tried the softer route, asking if perhaps the clause could be interpreted differently. General counsel, to her credit, gave him a single syllable: no. By evening, a board member had already emailed me directly, masking desperation behind a polite, "Would love to chat sometime this week about alignment opportunities." I didn't answer, because the thing about legal landmines is once they go off, there's no unstepping on them. And the louder they panicked, the quieter I became. It started with a voicemail from an outside counsel I didn't recognize, something about a generous offer and a clean resolution. I didn't call back. The next day, my inbox lit up. Evan's assistant sent a PDF attachment labeled Good Faith Proposal. Inside was a signed document offering me $5 million for full permanent rights to the 5 core patents. $5 million. For technology currently anchoring over half their projected revenue. I didn't respond. 2 days later, the number jumped to 12. This time, Evan called personally. He sounded upbeat, rehearsed. "We want to do right by you," he said, as if my silence was a misunderstanding and not a strategy. "Let's not drag this out. You helped build this company. You are part of the story." Funny, that's not what their last investor call suggested. I remember Josh on video touting their youth-led innovation pipeline. I remember the slides. I remember the line that called me an inherited talent no longer central to growth. I let Evan finish. Then I said, "I'll think about it," and hung up. A few hours later, Josh emailed me directly. The subject line was "Please." The body was pure theater. "You're sabotaging the company you helped build, Hema," he wrote, like guilt might outweigh legal fact. "We've all made mistakes, but this is hurting real people, real jobs." I stared at the screen for a moment, then hit reply. Attached, a PDF of Section 17C, fully signed and dated by the founder. No commentary, just the clause. Highlighted in yellow. Below that, a second attachment, the internal strategy deck someone had foolishly sent me last quarter. I hadn't asked for it. They must have CC'd me out of habit. Page 17. Legacy contributors, include my name, likely to phase out post-IPO. That little sentence had been bullet-pointed under operational efficiency. So I forwarded both files. No message, no subject line, just proof. Proof that I wasn't sabotaging a thing. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't angry. I was enforcing the agreement they signed and they ignored. The leverage wasn't emotional. It was structural. And I wasn't negotiating. I was reminding them, you don't get to erase the foundation and expect the roof to hold. They say desperation breeds mistakes, and Brincor made a big one. In their scramble to contain the situation, they ordered an internal audit of every single piece of code tied to the disputed patents. The idea, I assume, was to isolate my original work, draw a line, and pretend everything else was their shiny, new invention. Clean, compartmentalized. Legal could slap a bow on it and tell investors everything was under control. It backfired. Hard. Turns out, the audit revealed something none of them were prepared for, especially not Josh, who had apparently built half his modernization strategy on code I'd authored 8, 9, even 10 years ago. Buried under new GUI wrappers and dressed up with jargon, the guts were still mine. 3 core modules still in development, slated for a $1.2 billion vendor presentation, were nothing more than derivative works. And not subtly, either. My original architecture was intact. Same logic flows, same encryption schema, same variable tags which I always named after obscure bird species to track my own branches. There they were. Turdus migratorius, Corvus brachyrhynchos, Cialia cialis, flying right through the center of their new tech stack. I didn't yell, didn't storm in with a printed codebase and a megaphone. I just called my lawyer. He drafted a cease and desist the next morning, sent it directly to legal, CC'd the board, and attached a tidy line-by-line breakdown of my code versus theirs, timestamps included. We also threw in a section from the Copyright Office that explained how derivative works still require licensing from the original IP holder. Brincroft's CTO, who I trained a decade ago, tried to argue substantial innovation, claimed their devs had evolved the modules well beyond my contribution. That's when we hit them with the kill shot. Git metadata. Because while they'd been dressing up the house, I'd left the blueprints coded into the foundation. Every line, every change, every function refactor bore my digital signature, date stamped and traceable. Their innovation? It was lipstick on a structure I poured the concrete for. And now, they were sitting on a billion-dollar demo built on IP they didn't legally own. The panic spread fast. The vendor pitch was less than 3 weeks out. Canceling it would spook investors. Going through with it could trigger federal IP violations and a public injunction if we filed. I didn't even need to make threats. The code spoke for itself. And the deeper they dug, the more they realized it wasn't just the patents. They had built their empire on a legal sinkhole. And I was the only one holding the deed. I drafted the letter myself. Not because I didn't trust my legal team, they were meticulous, worth every dollar. But some things you write in your own voice. Not for dramatics, not to gloat, but to make sure no one misreads what's coming. There's a rhythm to legal finality when it's written by the person who holds the fuse. I mailed it by registered courier. One hard copy to the Brincor board, one to general counsel, and one to their primary investor group in Palo Alto. It read simply, "As of this date, I assert exclusive rights to U.S. Patent Nos. 844, 846, 849, and all dependent intellectual property as defined under Section 17C of the signed licensing agreement dated April 12, 2013. Any continued or future use of said intellectual property, including derivative works, without written license from the author, will be subject to legal action under federal IP violation statutes, including but not limited to Title 35 of the U.S. Code. No emotion, no nostalgia, just law." 3 days later, I got a notification from the courier, signed and received. 10 minutes after that, a message from a friend in the building, one of the few I still trusted, let me know 3 directors had scheduled emergency career shifts. Within the week, all 3 had resigned. The spin was swift. Pursuing other opportunities, they said, refocusing on family. But I knew better. They weren't jumping ship, they were abandoning a vessel that had just discovered its engine was stolen and the tide was turning legal. That same afternoon, Brincor's general counsel reached out. Her email was the usual mix of polished concern and veiled panic. "We believe there may have been a misunderstanding in terms of legacy ownership interpretation. Our preference would be to resolve this matter amicably and expediently. Would you be open to a private mediation session with the board?" I forwarded the message to my legal team and didn't reply. Then I opened a new draft, not a settlement agreement, a licensing framework. Because if they wanted to keep running on what I'd built, they'd be paying for it like everyone else. No discounts, no courtesy, market rate, indexed to inflation and my time. They thought I was bluffing, that I'd fold under pressure or nostalgia or guilt, but that letter wasn't a threat. It was a declaration. And by then, the clock wasn't ticking for me anymore. It was ticking for them. I didn't even announce it. No LinkedIn post, no press release, no whispered leak to tech blogs. Just a quiet onboarding at Valisan Industries where the chair in the corner office already had my name on the plate. Chief Technology Strategist. New badge, new email, same mind they used to call legacy. Now, suddenly, I was valuable again. 2 weeks into my new role, Valisan made its move. They issued a public bid to acquire Brincor's logistics division, my old sandbox, for a fraction of what it was once worth. Not hostile, just opportunistic, calculated, the kind of move a company makes when it knows the heart of the machine isn't beating anymore. The press ate it up, the reversion raid, they called it. Catchy, accurate, a little too flattering maybe, but I didn't mind. The acquisition review was scheduled at a neutral site. Sleek conference room, mirrored glass, not a wire out of place. I walked in late, on purpose. Evan was already there, jaw clenched, trying to look unfazed in a jacket 2 sizes too tight. Josh sat beside him, flipping nervously through a packet he didn't understand. They didn't greet me. I didn't speak either. I took my seat across from them, opened the term sheet Valison's legal had prepped, and slowly read through the pages. Not for show, for precision. Each clause was a blade, and I wanted to be sure every one of them was sharp. Halfway through, I reached the line, the one I'd written myself. All IP listed herein is contingent on separate license from original author, filed under record with the U.S. Patent Office and governing exclusive use terms outlined in Appendix C. I underlined it, deliberately, pressed the pen until it bled through the page, then slid the document across the table toward Evan. He didn't touch it, didn't blink, just stared at the line like it was a fire alarm he'd pulled himself, now screaming back in his face. Josh leaned in, whispering something, probably hoping I'd say something. Extend a branch, break the silence, ease the tension. But I wasn't there to ease anything. I was the tension. I was the clause. I was the reminder that sometimes the person you push out of the frame was holding the lens the whole time. And in that moment, across that cold table, they finally understood. They hadn't just lost control of their patents. They'd lost control of the room. It didn't happen all at once. First came the investor exodus. Quiet phone calls, panicked emails, a flurry of regretful reallocations as Brincor's stock value bled out in real time. Then came the vendors. One by one, they pulled back, citing uncertainty in proprietary rights, which is corporate speak for we don't want to get sued because your house is built on sand. The final blow was poetic. The federal logistics contract, the one Evan used to brag about like it was his birthright, was reassigned. Valison won it cleanly, compliance ready, licensing in place. No asterisks, no litigation risk, no desperate scrambling from legal. Our CEO stepped up to the podium at the quarterly press briefing, standing beneath a screen that displayed the newly signed $1.7 billion federal partnership. He smiled, turned to the press and said, "This is what happens when you ignore the fine print." There was a flicker of recognition in the crowd. They knew who he meant. They knew why Brincor wasn't even at the table anymore. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. I wasn't sitting in the back row of someone else's story anymore. I was writing the next chapter. No lawsuits, no speeches, no drama, just paperwork, just patience, just a woman who read every line they didn't. I watched from the side as Brincor's name quietly disappeared from the industry coverage, from the contracts, from the conversation. Evan tried to save face. Rumors said he moved to Austin and started consulting for a startup that hadn't heard the full story yet. Josh, last I checked, he'd pivoted to some crypto-adjacent nonsense. Of course. And me? I was sitting in the same meetings now, only at the head of the table. I licensed my patents the way I always intended. Responsibly, with protections in place. I built new structures around them. Not just code, but compliance, strategy, legacy. They thought I was decoration. A framed photo of past relevance. Turns out, I was the blueprint. And all I did was let the contracts speak louder than their egos.